Good morning, Prof.
Good morning, sir. How are you today?
I'm fine, thank you. And a very hearty good morning to everyone who is joining our live stream today. You probably, I don't know, it could also be evening, afternoon, or night, wherever you're watching from. But greetings to you. It's always a privilege to be allowed the opportunity to come into your space with these discussions with Prof. Thank you for tuning into the channel today. Today, we want to talk about war. We're discussing the subject of war. A world at war, reversing the trend. A world at war, reversing the trend. War is as old as humanity, yet it persists even in modern times, whether it's regional conflicts or geopolitical maneuverings. The world we live in today is kind of fixated with war. And often it's ordinary men, women, and children that bear the brunt of this violence, the displacement, and the despair. So today with Prof, I want to kind of inquire into the global interests in war and finding pathways for peace. So please, if it's a subject that fascinates you to get involved in the conversation, drop your questions in the comments, your reactions. We want to hear from you also. Prof,
Yes, sir.
on the subject, with the advancement of civilization, we keep saying that we are advancing. Humanity is advancing, and it leaves me a bit intrigued and bewildered. With the advancement in human civilization, one would suppose that we should have found more kind of amicable ways of resolving our conflicts. But we see today that the tendency towards war and armed conflicts persists today and seems to be on the rise. Why do you suppose that wars are even more prevalent today?
Well, it's the main purpose is not to resolve conflicts. That's the issue. It's the main purpose is who can control the world. There's a lot at stake at the moment, and there are certain interests in the world that don't want to share power, but want to dominate the world scene. And so it's because of this that these interests cannot come to terms with others. They must uh, overcome. They must prevail and dominate the world. It's called um, well, these people just want to take control of everything, hegemony. So, or one other term is unipolarism. So, uni being one power
Yeah,
dominating everything, not sharing power with other blocks or other groups in the world. So hegemony is the goal, and that means there must be constant war. It's like the Roman Empire. They their goal was to expand their empire and to dominate regions, and therefore war was continual because they couldn't share their realm with any other power.
yeah,
It wasn't a matter of coming to peace with people, it was a matter of being the dominant player. And so that's still the kind of world that we live in. There is a group that's been dominating now for hundreds of years, and they're still wanting to keep that dominance going at any cost. And that's the dangerous thing about it. It's at any cost. They do not want to lose control. So it could get quite serious. The stakes could get very high. There's a lot of danger ahead
yeah,
because if this group that's in dominance, if they're threatened that they will lose that dominance, then there's nothing they will not do to try to maintain that
yeah,
position. So at first they try to hide, to try to do their things behind the scenes, but when things get out of hand, they have to step up their game and their risk of destruction in order to maintain control. So that's the type of of situation we're in at the moment globally.
All right. When we see geopolitical power plays when it comes to the subject of war around the world today, I want you to talk to us about the rationale behind proxy wars that we see around the world today and the setbacks they have caused for underdeveloped regions in the world. What's the mindset behind all these proxy wars we experienced and the impact they've had in, especially in a place like Africa?
Well, proxy means to fight a war through by using someone else through a proxy, through someone stepping in on your behalf to fight for you. So it's using another nation to do your dirty work. There can be proxy nations that fight wars on the behalf of other nations, or proxy terrorist groups. So terrorist groups might not be just groups that rise on their own accord, but they can be sponsored and raised up by someone else. So they can be a proxy terrorist group. And the people that sponsored this terrorist group and rose them up are not playing. The world often doesn't know who they are. So a proxy group is behind. The proxy employer, the nation that is actually manipulating proxy groups, proxy nations, or proxy terrorist groups. This nation is behind the scenes. People don't know who they are. It's hidden, and so they work through private agreements, sponsorship programs, laundered money, and so to do their work secretly, so they're not exposed. Especially today in so-called democratic countries, nations, the population of those nations may not want their government to go to war. They don't want to lose soldiers. It's unpalatable for
Yeah.
people in their army to be dying on foreign battlefields. So in order to avoid popular anger at home, these governments will use other nations as proxy nations, do their fighting through these people, and also raise up terrorist groups and use these terrorist groups to bring down regimes, change governments abroad. Terrorist groups will, bring instability in nations and cause an environment for revolution where governments can be overthrown. And this is happening all over the world today. When they want to target a nation, they will use proxy groups to fight against them. And these proxy groups can be, as I said, nations or terrorist organizations. What they do is the people orchestrating this, they find some splinter group within the country, or some disquiet, some section, and that they divide the country racially or ideologically, politically, and then they make an enemy group within that nation, and then begin to sponsor that group in division against the nation. So this is happening all over the world. As I said, it even happens in Western nations today, where you get this identity politics that divides the country racially, politically, with woke ideology today is a very divisive thing. And so woke is not just something that's spontaneous, a grassroots movement, it's sponsored. It's deliberately, woke is a proxy movement. So it's sponsored by people behind the scenes that are trying
Yeah.
to create political instability within countries. And so, as we've said in other programs, this is like communist revolution basic strategies. That's how the communists overthrew the government in Russia 100 years ago, by causing division and eventually revolution within the country. And they do that all over the world today. So that's what's happening in America, Australia, Britain, Europe. It's everywhere. And all the countries around Russia too. So Russia was these globalist organized division, revolutionary movements in nations all around Russia in order to bring threats against the Russian nation for purposes we might get into. But so that's what's going on globally, and most of it's hidden from people. They think something like woke is a grassroots movement, the spontaneous movement of the people. They don't know that it has sponsorship and revolutionary issues behind it that are using it as a proxy political movement. In Africa, it's the same thing, and in Africa, it tends to be geared towards the formation of non-industrial governments in Africa. So, in other words, globalism has designated Africa to be a resource center for the world's industries, and therefore they don't want Africa using those resources or having any sort of sovereignty or autonomy over those resources. They want African governments to be in the hands of foreign interests, doing what globalists want them to do, not be sovereign governments. So globalists can control the wealth and the resources of Africa themselves by African governments obeying them and following their wishes and desires. So any government that rises up in Africa that is nationalist, that is maybe industrialist, or a sovereign government. Some people call it Pan-African. I don't really know all the implications of a term like that, so I tend to use other words like a sovereignist government, nationalist government, industrialist government, a government that wants to promote industry within the African nation so that production and income can rise for people of that nation, so poverty can decline. The only way poverty can decline in Africa is if African nations become industrial centers. And so globalists are stopping African nations becoming industrial centers. That's been the policy of globalists. We might get into later what I mean by globalist, but at the moment I'm just using that term in the general sense, without getting down into the details of who these globalists are. But globalists, as I said, want to stop African nations industrializing. And so they have very clear, specific deindustrialization policies for Africa. And that's one of the ways these manifested was through the structural adjustment program that swept through Africa in the 80s. Privatizing industries in Africa so that these could be sold on the global market and then stripped of their assets, closed down, so that all the industry in African nations could be shut down. Through the structural adjustment program was basically that engineered to shut down African industries, and they claim to be making the economy more efficient by opening African economies to global capital markets, taking away regulations between African economies and global capital markets, global money. But that's not going to lead to more efficiency because it'll subject African economies to be raped by global interest. When you get a free flow of money into Africa and out of Africa without any protection, without any checks and balances, then African industries are vulnerable to be taken advantage of. And that's what's happened to African farming. It's happened to African textile industries, and African resources now are under the power of foreign capital interest. And so what globalism does is that it uses proxy groups to stop any national interest rising up in Africa. So if a government comes into fore in Africa that has national interest, a nationalist government that wants to industrialize and take control back over the African economy and the African nation, so that the African nation becomes sovereign and makes its own decisions as to its economic policies, then the globalists will bring intervention into that nation to stop those governments from becoming strong. And so they will do that by causing division within the country. So it could be political division or religious division. And it can be activist groups. It can even be terrorism. And so when these or this can be false accusations, basically saying that this local government is sponsoring terrorism, financing terrorism abroad, and so the globalists will then bring economic sanctions onto that country. Just bring out false accusations in order to accuse that nation of certain wrongdoings, and meaning the globalists can bring sanctions against that government. And so these are the threats, and governments know that these threats are there, and so they know that if they step out of line with globalist interests, what the globalists want them to do, that they will be accused, they will be threatened, that their political movements will be sponsored within their country against them. And so it'll make their government very difficult. It'll make it very difficult for them to govern. Leaders know this will happen to them if they step out of line, if they disobey the globalist interests, so to speak. So this is a colonialism. So colonialism never really finished in Africa. It just changed its character, and it's a financial colonialism now. Dominating the financial markets, the banking industries, the resources, the capital markets, the business interests are still being dominated by global powers, and so there never was a decolonization. And so I think people are starting to become aware of this, but it's very hard to act against, because I said the propaganda here. So if a government disobeys global powers, they will be accused on the media of all sorts of wrongdoing, and their government will be destabilized by a global propaganda campaign.
Yeah.
All sorts of lies will be told about them. They will construct all sorts of false evidence against them, that they will take photos of them with prostitutes and, all sorts of things like that, killing a dog or whatever. I mean, I'm joking about that, but that they will construct a whole lot of even serious issues. But a lot of these, some of them might be true, a lot of them would be false. Just false propaganda. They make it, like what happened to Trump, President Trump in America. He started going against the globalists in his first term when he was elected in 2016 in America, and he wanted to reindustrialize America. So in previous decades, a lot of industry had been moved out of America, and the nation deindustrialized on a large scale, and wages went down, jobs were lost. The middle class, a lot of the middle class, the workers, the laborers came into poverty. They can't, their wages are not able to pay their living expenses now. And so globalists began to invest in financial assets, not in industry, like land, and push the price of land up. So people can't afford housing anymore, the normal person. So Trump wanted to turn this around and reindustrialize America, and bring benefits back to the working people in the country, raise wages, lower house prices, lower inflation, lower national debt, these sorts of things that improve the industrial economy of the country. And so the globalists orchestrated a major campaign against Trump with lies, fabricating a whole narrative against him, that he was complicit in corruption, political corruption, with other nations around the world, that he was going to run a dictatorship in America. It was a relentless campaign of lies, and it's still going on till today because these globalists have a lot to lose. And so, if nationalism, in the good sense, I don't mean nationalism in an aggressive sense, but in terms of regaining sovereignty, that's what I mean by nationalism. Not in the sense that we separate from other nations and isolate ourselves and become aggressive against other nations. That's the propaganda against nationalism. They've made nationalism a dirty word so that people won't talk about things like that. That they'll be blacklisted, so to speak. And so yeah, this is the reality. So people. So when we talk about nationalism, it's not this bad thing that propaganda says it to be. Rather, we're talking about regaining sovereignty. We're talking about the people of the country ruling the country. Through that, in other words, the political will of the leaders comes from the people. And I'm not saying it has to be in the form of modern democracy or anything like that, but we get a situation, whatever the form of government is in any country, it's none of any other country's business. That's for the business of the country alone. But whatever the political form is within that country, it basically should be one where the leaders are running the nation according to the best interest of the people within that nation.
Yeah.
What is their good interest, what will prosper them, what will help them, what will give them a good future. At the moment, most politicians around the world are puppets. They're not serving their people. They're serving masters from abroad. And that's what happened in Europe when the European leaders were turned against Russia, and they were turned against Russia by the London banks, by the globalist banks, because of BRICS. BRICS is what Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and a new economic bloc, and many other countries have been joining it. So this BRICS, this new economic bloc, has been raised up as a competition to the global financial order, the globalist capital markets that are controlling the world through London banks and Wall Street. When I say Wall Street in America, really under the control of London banks, globalist banks, which has been, this is what I say, has been going on for hundreds of years. And so BRICS has been a major, it's positioned itself as a major competitor. It's not really in that position now, but it looks like it will be soon if it keeps building the way it is. And so the globalists, the London financiers and so on, had to destroy Russia because of its rise as one of the members of BRICS. They had to destroy BRICS and maintain that global capital control, banking control. So the European leaders are under the control of the London banks. They're not serving the people of their nations, the interest of their nations. And then the bankers have been instructing European leaders to turn against Russia and to destroy, to build up a whole lot of propaganda against it, to provoke it and to push Russia into a place of war, and using Ukraine as a proxy state for that, which has been terrible for Ukraine. It's just, I just saw a report, on how Ukraine is rounding up soldiers from the streets, just forcing people into the Ukrainian army, kidnapping them out of their cars and houses and so on, and sending them out onto the battlefields where they're just killed almost straight away. Ukraine cannot fight the Russian army. The Russian army does things slowly. It's not like Western armies. Western armies have the policy of shock and awe, going in quickly, blowing everything up in a couple of days. Russia doesn't operate like that. It operates slowly, and it takes its time and wears down the enemy without putting its own Russian soldiers at too much risk. So, but basically, the Russian armed forces and industry and army and population is far too much for Ukraine. And so the European leaders have been forcing Ukraine to continue this war. They could have had peace a number of times in the past decade, but the European leaders stopped them from doing that. And so they're sacrificing large numbers of Ukrainian people on the battlefield, which is terrible. It's just, I just don't understand how people can sleep at night, because they're carrying out policies they know that are leading to the death of so many people. And yet these people that are forcing these policies, they don't go to the battlefield. Their children don't go to the battlefield. It's other people that they're sacrificing. And they know they can't win by doing this. But it's, there's a lot of advantages to them to keep this war going. We call it forever wars. You can launder money. The more money that is sent into Ukraine, the more that comes back. We call it kickbacks, corruption, money laundering. And there's a hope of eventually wearing down Russia economically, but it's not working because Russia has too many resources and is able to keep its economy and industry propped up. In fact, Russia's economy and industry is doing better now than it was before the war and before all these sanctions against them, because they're becoming self-reliant. And it's a lesson to all of us and to African countries as well, that no matter the threats of sanctions against us and the threats of the globalists, if we stop being afraid of those things and become self-reliant and say, no, we're not going to be afraid of these threats, but we're rather going to turn to ourselves and build our own economies and our own resources and our own capital markets, our own banks, and take sovereignty back over our country, we'll find in the end that these foreign sanctions don't have the bite. They're more bark than bite. And if we will stop relying on the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank and look for financial policies that are sovereign, that are home-based, that are based through Nigerian governments and banks, they will work. And I really plead with this. We've got to learn to understand how Nigeria can develop sovereign banking and sovereign financing, sovereign capital markets. We can do that, and it works. It works well. We can see people like Abraham Lincoln did that. When the global banks were trying to destroy America in the Civil War, when Abraham Lincoln was president, and he needed loans to fight the Civil War, to fight the slavery states in the South, the banks of London offered him loans at, something like, I can't remember, really high percentage rates, 35% or something like that would have bankrupted the Washington government and Abraham Lincoln. Because at that time, the British banks were against Lincoln and America. They were trying to destroy America. They still are today as a sovereign country, so they can use it for their own globalist purposes. America in its past has been isolationist in the sense of not wanting to interfere in other nations, go to war against other nations. But Britain has been trying to take over its politics to use its army as an interventionist army, which they've been able to do in recent decades, to fight against Vietnam and Korea and Iraq and many other nations. So they try to use the American army for their globalist purposes. And America has had enough of that, and the people don't want that. They want to pull their army out of globalism and focus on building their own nation. But anyway, getting back to Lincoln, when the British banks were trying to destroy him, the British banks were supporting the slave states in the South of America. They wanted America not to be an industrial economy, but an agricultural economy, supported by cheap labor or slave labor. And so the British banks were supporting the slave states, trying to help them to defeat Lincoln. So Lincoln had no money to pay his army or to produce his ammunitions. And so what he did is he developed the policies of sovereign banking and sovereign money creation, credit creation without the foreign banks. He printed the dollar himself as a sovereign government without borrowing it. And that means he didn't owe the banks. He didn't have to pay the interest that the banks were charging.
Yeah.
And it worked very well because he didn't put the money he printed, he didn't put it into inflationary sectors of the economy, but into non-inflationary sectors like industrialization, infrastructure, building huge projects like railways and dams. And when the government creates money without the foreign banks, creates it through its own institutions, printing it out of nothing. If that money is put into major national infrastructure projects, then the resources of that country will grow, and they won't have inflation. Instead, they'll have wages, they'll have jobs. So Abraham Lincoln, without the foreign banks, built America into an industrial giant. And that's why it is what it is today. So he developed the policies of sovereign money, sovereign credit creation, sovereign money creation, sovereign banking, and refused to use the foreign banks. And that's what made America free. And so he tried to export these policies around the world. Lincoln brought in leaders from all these nations around the world to show them how this works. Germany, China, Japan, France, Russia, many other places. And they were developing an alliance of sovereign nations and sovereign banking and sovereign industrial centers around the world that would become free of British imperialism. And it was becoming a major threat to the British Empire. And so the Britons stopped that by assassinating Lincoln and all these other leaders from around the world, and then moving the world into World War I to stop these international railway systems they were building for global trade. So by creating international catastrophes, crises through the First and Second World War, they're able to bring the world back under their control. So that's what they would be wanting to do today, with America getting out of control, Trump following Lincoln's policies again, in regaining American sovereignty over its politics and industry and army. The globalists would want to undermine what Trump's doing, and they've tried all sorts of different things, propaganda, false accusations, in many, many ways, which we won't go into now. But having failed in all of those things, they tried to arrest Trump, they tried to imprison him. Having failed in all these things, their last resort would be something like nuclear war. If they can't win, then they destroy the system and start again and take back control again. That's always been the way. That's what the First Second World War did. And so, or through some virus, biological warfare or something like that. They've got to destabilize politics because they're losing on the political board. They're losing on the narrative board. Wokeism is losing. And so their destruction of national values through wokeism. We believe in faith, family, and flag.
Yeah.
Build our faith, build our families, and respect for our nation, our flag, our national identity. These things are critical to a country's future. And these are the three things that woke destroys, globalism destroys. And so, but they're losing on this field now, this propaganda field of woke. And countries are waking up now, and they're starting to rebuild their faith, family, and flag. And so, if globalism is losing on the political, on the narrative, on the information field, Their false information is not working anymore. People are seeing it as propaganda. Then nuclear war would be their last hope, because the stakes are too high. They're going to lose everything. If Trump and Putin become friends and build a global system of trade and sovereign industry with all nations in partnership, that's the end of the London banking monopoly, and of the British Empire, which is still functioning financially in the world. That's the end of it. Now, what they did is that, as I said, these London bankers controlled the politicians in Europe and turned them against Russia to destroy BRICS. But that's destroyed Europe, because Europe doesn't have resources. Russia is really rich in resources. Europe doesn't have resources. But Europe has great industry, or had, like Germany, one of the greatest industrial centers. And so it was in Europe's interest to partner with Russia, to become friends with them, and to say, well, let's trade technology for resources. Let's build each other's economies.
Yeah.
And Europe would have really prospered as a nation. The people, the wages, jobs, everything would have really prospered in Europe. But the Western bankers could not allow that to happen, because it would build BRICS. So they had to, because the European politicians are puppets. They are not leaders. They're just doing what the banks tell them to do. And they've destroyed Europe by turning against Russia. The Ukrainian war has destroyed Europe. And so Trump has come in and said, okay, if you don't want to make friends with Russia, I will. And now he's in peace talks with Russia to develop contracts with Russia. The best way to keep a country in peace is to do business with them, not to threaten them all the time.
Yeah.
But to say, okay, it's in your interest that there's peace and that we work together, because we're going to make your country wealthy. And you're going to make us wealthy. It's going to be a partnership together, and we're going to bless each other in terms of a good environment for business and for the people of the country. And so Trump and Putin are serving the people of their nation, not a globalist agenda. They're serving the laborers, the wage earners of their country, just like Lincoln did. And Lincoln worked with the Tsar of Russia. Lincoln was on good terms with Russia. And the globalists don't want people to know that. They want Russia to be an everlasting, eternal enemy to America. And that's really what's scaring them now, that America and Russia are coming together, and that is the end of their globalism. And so Putin and they're having peace talks, Putin and Trump, but it's the real issue that they're having is business talks. Let's develop resources, let's develop industry, let's partner together. They're what the real discussions are about. And because they know that will guarantee peace for Russia and for Eastern Europe. And so that's how Trump brings peace, and it works. He's doing it all over the world at the moment. But see, the good thing is that, just like Lincoln's vision, this is not just for America and Russia. This is for the whole world.
Yeah.
Putin and Trump met in Alaska last week, because that's where they want to build the railway from Alaska into Russia. It's very close, and bring in a business relationship between the two countries the globalists have been trying to stop. That's why they say how evil Putin is, to stop Western countries wanting to build relationships for trade and industrial development. So always the propaganda. Now, I'm not saying that I know, that Putin is innocent, and all. I don't know. I don't know all the things there, but I know the way out of this, is the way that the path that Lincoln was taking, and also F.D. Roosevelt, President of America in the Second World War, he was developing business relationships with the Soviet Union. Now, Stalin was not a good man, but the way out of war was to develop proper relationships with them. Russia basically won the Second World War, not America, but the propaganda is America did it. But America helped. But it was Russians died at an enormous level, far more than any other country. They suffered severely in the Second World War, and then we all just forgot that and threw Russia under the bus after the Second World War, and the global bank said no, it's better that they're our enemy. As bad as Stalin was and communism is and all, and that dictatorship, I hate it. But it was the globalists that 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 constructed the Iron Curtain and the Cold War.
Mm.
It wasn't Russia that did that, and that went on for many decades and caused isolation and made the post Second World War world into a continuation of the British Empire,
Yeah.
business as usual. That's the system that we inherited today with the
Mm.
International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the Bank of International Settlements. It's been a financial system that Russia and the East, China and the others have not been able to contend with, and it's served the globalists very well. What the globalists don't want is multipolarism.
Mm.
Sort of different sectors of the world coming together to build each
Yeah.
other's economy and sharing in our world and sharing in our future. They want a hegemony, unipolarism,
Mm.
and they'll fight to the bitter end to maintain that. But I don't think they can bring in nuclear war to make sure that they um, continue their hegemony control of the world, hegemonic control of the world. I don't think they can, because I think there is a partnership between Trump and the American army and the global scene, between Putin and Xi of China, North Korea, Saudi Arabia, other nations that would normally be considered enemy nations that the globalists used to control, like Iran.
Mm. Mm.
Um, these nations are on side with Trump. Now, there's a lot of theatrics and drama to pretend that they're not. This is a deceptive um, thing going on here, because the stakes are very high. This is a very serious situation, trying to avert the power of this globalism from them throwing the chessboard on the ground and destroying everything.
Mm.
So Trump knows what they do, because they did this in the First and Second World War to destroy Lincolnism. He knows that they will destroy everything if they can, if they're losing politically in America. So he had to, not just Trump, but there are sectors of the American army also that had to be very careful about this and set up alliances globally, not to go into this with their eyes closed. I mean, to think that you can take on this globalist empire without careful plans is naivety to the highest
Mm.
level.
Mm.
These people are, one, very powerful. Two, they're everywhere. They're in every nation. They control governments all over the world. And three, they have no conscience. It doesn't matter to them how many millions die. They don't care about that at all. And that is very clear when you look at the evidence over the years and you really know what's happening. It's these people are wicked. Um, and you get people like Bill Gates, who I heard of recently in Kenya, flogging his contraception. Why does he hate African children so much? Why does he hate Africans? That he says that if you take his contraception, you won't have a baby for 8 years. And Gates is happy about that. I mean, how can that be a worthy thing to promote? And then he goes back to his home saying he's done a good job stopping Africans from having children. It's because of in the Kissinger report, the Henry Kissinger report, 1974, it states clearly that African nations must not populate, that their resources must be available for rich countries.
Yeah.
And so African nations must not populate. This is demonic. He's anti-life to say that we shouldn't, and globalism has spread this idea, like it's Malthusian, we talked about it before, that, we're overpopulated, we shouldn't have children. And
Mm.
most of the world has bought into this idea that we shouldn't have children, or if we do, we should only have one or two or, three, or it's a lie. It's demonic. Um, we're not overpopulating the world. We're not in risk of hunger. The only risk of hunger we are is when these globalists undermine our farming, like destroying our crops,
Yeah.
like they've done with our ginger crop in Nigeria. They brought in a geo. We were the third biggest exporters of ginger until the USAID brought in a GMO ginger crop and destroyed our ginger industry in this country. And now we import ginger. There are many, many different ways in which farming is targeted around the world and in Africa in order to produce food crises, for many reasons. One of them is to give us the idea that we're overpopulated, which is a lie. We do not have sovereign control of our farming. They bring in GMO seeds and they tell you what to plant because they're the only seeds you can get on the market. And then you can't use those seeds next year. But once you plant those seeds and get a harvest, the seeds you get from the harvest are non-fertile.
Yeah.
So you have to go back and buy seeds again from the market the following year. So that means Nigeria, we don't have our own seeds anymore. We have to buy them globally. So we're not a sovereign country. They can stop us farming anytime. So a country that does not have its own seed is not a country. It's a puppet state. It's a proxy state. It's not a country. And so these are the things that have been done to us, not just to Nigeria, but you see the same thing that they did to Europe in stopping Europe from becoming friends with Russia and developing a prosperous economy. They've done the same thing to Nigeria. We're all proxy states. But the hope is now that there is a new movement that is globally that's bringing down this globalist control and building sovereign nations, sovereign politics, sovereign industry, sovereign agriculture, sovereign money, and sovereign trade relations, so that we work with each other on a bilateral basis. The
Yeah.
globalists don't tell us who to trade with and what prices and what currency to use. We decide that ourselves. So there's a movement now of of raising up nationalism, not isolationism, but national sovereignty again.
Yeah.
Governments again will be serving the people of that country and not globalist masters. That's what we're moving into now. It's a wonderful time. It's happening, and I don't think the globalists can stop it
Amen.
because the alliance globally is too strong between all these major leaders. This was all sorted out in Trump's first term. He went to Saudi Arabia and did the dance of the sword, which no foreigner ever does in Saudi Arabia. He did it. And there was a great purge of corruption in Saudi Arabia after that. And the Abraham Accords were weapons in the Middle East to bring peace, which is working out today. All these major governments worldwide are in league with this movement, this sovereign movement, with Trump's movement. And so Trump's just not waking up one morning, and trying his best. This is a major global alliance of sovereign nations wanting to bring to pass the vision that Lincoln had and FD Roosevelt had, and other presidents. President Kennedy had this. And I'm just talking about American presidents because they're the ones I study. There have been many Nigerian
Yeah.
nationalists who had the same vision as well. Nigerians need to resurrect that education. Nigerians need to get involved in education within this country to find the proper history of our nation, not the globalist history, the rewriting of our history, but those Nigerians that had the interest of Nigeria at heart and not globalism, and were the nation builders. Nation builders. We had them in Nigeria. We need to resurrect them, so to speak, and educate our people about stop globalism controlling our education system. And we need to build the curriculum of our education system concerning the things that are in the interest of our country, not in the interest of others. So thank you, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. That was good perspective on the geopolitical power plays at the world today. Now, I want to look at the economic stakes in war and ask you, what do you suppose is the relationship between war, resource control, profiteering, and political leverage?
Okay, so one of the things is the problem is the global banks, because the global banks make a lot of money out of a country's debt, and they shouldn't do. Like in America, got the Federal Reserve, and money will be printed by the banks and loaned to the government, and so the government has to pay taxes to the private banks for that money, and then those taxes are raised through. The government has to pay interest on those loans to those private banks, a lot of interest. In America at the moment, their annual interest payment is higher than any other payment in the country. Like, it's higher than any other cost. It's number one. And so the banks are making money on that interest, and then the government taxes the people so that the people pay that interest through their taxes. So, as Lincoln found out, you shouldn't be loaning from the banks. The government should print its own money, and then it doesn't have to pay interest to private banks and doesn't have to tax the people. You see, when the Federal Reserve was established as a private banking system in America, the taxation department was established the same year. Before that, they didn't have national federal tax, but they needed it because of private banking. So the more debt the country is in now through private banking, the more money the banks earn.
Mm.
And they're making trillions every year, not just through federal debt, but through just other mortgage debt that they create on a daily basis for housing and for other investment loans that they give for the stock market and financial assets. The banks make a lot of money issuing credit for just general wealth investment, not for productive investment. The banks try not to lend money for industrial investment or infrastructure investment within a country. They try to lend money to people who want to invest it in the stock market or in housing, things that are not producing anything, just inflating prices, just investments like putting money in bigger barns. They will loan money for that.
Yeah.
But they won't loan it for investment. Like the International Monetary Fund will not loan money to Nigeria for industrial investment or infrastructure investment, but only for aid. And so if you borrow money for aid, you're not building anything, and so you're not making any income as a nation, and so you can't pay that loan back. It's eternal debt slavery. The IMF is deliberately building nations like Nigeria and many others, most nations, to become eternal debt slaves, and that's why we have to get rid of them and say, no, we will print our own money. We will not take it from the private banks, and we will use that money for industrial purposes. And then as we build industries and infrastructure, we have income from those industries.
Yeah.
So the country is building income, and that's what gives our currency its value. The value of the naira will go up because we're building income within our nation. We've got to get away from this globalist banking system, which is turning everyone into slaves. So war is another area where the government has to borrow a lot of money. So it's in the interest of banks that countries go to war and they stay at war. So they lend money to governments to be making weapons constantly. And to fight a war is very expensive.
Yeah.
And if you have to fight that war every year for 30 years, that's huge money you're borrowing.
Yes,
And you're
sir.
borrowing it from the banks. But the banks don't have that money. They create it out of nothing. They just push a button on a computer and create $1 trillion and give it to the government. And so the banks don't have to, it doesn't cost them anything to loan that money, but they're getting interest on it every day. It's been paid to them. So they're cheating everyone in the country through taxes, who has to pay interest on money that doesn't even belong to the banks in the first place.
Yeah.
It belongs to their economy. So this is a huge fraud. So the more they can go to war, the more profit the banks get. So they'll always be promoting war. Like when at the moment Trump's trying to make peace with Putin, Every day, the television, the news, the media in America is, oh, we can't have peace. No, this is bad. Trump's being deceived. He's failing. We have to stay at war. Or they try to make some other strategy like, a peace truce, or no, a ceasefire. Not peace, not a peace agreement, but a temporary ceasefire, so we can go back to war tomorrow. These people are wicked. They're evil people, trying to keep war going at all costs. Like someone has said about the Europeans, that they want to fight this war to the last Ukrainian. None of them die.
That's horrible.
Yeah, that's what a proxy nation is. They're the ones that die, the proxy nation.
Mm, mm.
And fighting wars in the Middle East brings huge profit to the banks. They can, like Libya, they tried to get Gaddafi tried to pull out of the dollar and build a Pan-African economy, a sovereign economy, and he was killed for that.
Mm.
And they brought a whole lot of propaganda. NATO, the way it's been led, is a criminal organization. The way they went after Gaddafi and Syria.
Yeah.
Not just NATO, but it's alliances, it's other interests, USAID and many other organizations around the world that purport to be democratic philanthropists, NGOs, but they're not. They're launderers of money, and they're sponsors to terrorism groups. We have all the data on that. We know it's certain, and so we know that these people sponsored groups like ISIS, Islamic Brotherhood, and other terrorist organizations, Al Qaeda. When Russia invaded Afghanistan back in, was it the 80s, 1980s, these NATO-aligned groups, Western-aligned groups, globalist-aligned groups, trained and rose up Al Qaeda to fight and the Taliban. In Afghanistan was a great country before NATO got involved with it. They had freedom. The woman used to walk down the street looking beautiful, and I don't mean lustful, like
Yeah.
we do, but looking beautiful, and it was a free country, And one of the reasons Russia invaded, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan back in 1980s is because the globalists were using that part of the world as a backdoor into destroy Russia, and Russia had to go in to protect its interest, its own security, which is why they went into Ukraine. And so, we can all talk about the evil of Russia, which is fair enough, but we have to take the speck out of our own eye first.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the problem with all of this stuff around the world, where it's always blaming the other. But no, we're involved in this Western interest, and we've got to look at ourselves. We've got to listen to what we've done. We've got to hear it. Like when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1989, 1990, the West promised it would not move NATO east towards Russia or the European Union, and it lied totally. There was a policy of Britain from that day, 1989, 1990, to move NATO and European Union east and to take all of those countries and eventually get into Russia and to destroy it like they did to the Balkans, break it into pieces so they could control its resources and its banking. And for many years, they did control the resources and the banking with global oligarchs until Putin came. And he started to prosecute criminals within his country and take back control of the nation as a sovereign power. And the propaganda against him for doing that has been horrific. And I don't know if his crimes. I don't know about that, but I do crimes of the Western banking interests in the propaganda. That is very clear, and that's all written on record. So, I mean, how would you like for the Soviet Union or Russia to take over the country right next to you? What country borders Nigeria?
Niger.
um, or Cameroon, any one of those, and put nuclear
Yeah,
weapons in it.
Cameroon, Niger.
Yeah.
Niger, yeah.
How would you like it if Russia was our enemy and they took over one of those bordering countries of Nigeria and put nuclear weapons in it and aimed them with a Abuja and then said,
Wow.
have a nice,
Wow.
you know, and
Wow.
we come in friendship, we come in peace. I mean, how
No,
would you like,
that
and
that
that's
that
what
would,
it's done with
that
Ukraine.
wouldn't be peace at all.
No. And so
If my
Russia's been
enemy,
warning NATO for years, don't do this, don't do this. That's a red line. It'll
yeah,
produce war if you do that. And they never
because if my
listen.
enemy becomes a friend with my neighbor immediately becomes a suspect.
Yeah, that's the war they're building. And they're doing it. You asked about the financial interests of war. There are huge financial interest in taking over the resources of Ukraine
Hmm.
and Russia. Massive. And so that's all they care about, these globalists. They don't care about who dies and the risk of Third World War. It's do or die. It's all or nothing. They must succeed in reducing Russia and China to subservience at any cost. And because that's what will give them control over the global economy. So we are in a very high stake situation. The situation we're in at the moment is extremely dangerous. The enemy is not going to say, oh, well, we lost this one and go home and watch television and retire. There's no way they're going to give up. They have to be stopped. They will not
Yeah,
give up. And so that's the situation we're in globally. This is not about, who's right and who's wrong in terms of the people of any country. This is not about we like this country and not that country. Look, we like the people of all of the countries, but all of our countries have been beguiled and deceived and brought into slavery by these globalists. The
yeah,
people of Britain have. This is not about British people. Or, I love Britain. That's my heritage. And the people of Britain, they're the ones being ripped off here. They're the ones whose wages are going down, energy costs are going up. It's Britain is really suffering economically and politically today. The country is near disaster because they don't have any politicians that serve the interest of the British people. All of them are globalist and bought and paid for by the banks. None of them serve the people of that country. And Britain is in serious trouble, and all of Europe is as well. So this is not about, well, we blame that country. No, we love all of these nations.
mm,
And
mm,
we're on side with all of these people, all of these
yeah,
nations. We stand
mm,
together for the interest of everybody.
mm,
So we don't want a divided world where we say this nation's of the devil and that one's of God. We've had enough of that.
yeah,
Gog and Magog divisions. This nation's good, that nation's evil. That's how the globalists have always divided us and brought us into war. First and Second World Wars were done. It was the globalists that sponsored Adolf Hitler. People like Prescott Bush, George Bush's grandfather, was a sponsor of Hitler. Major corporations in the US on Wall Street they sponsored Hitler. I could name those corporations today. They're still well known in the world. They sponsored Hitler. Not only did they sponsor Hitler, these Wall Street corporations led a fascist coup, a Nazi coup against the government, against F.D. Roosevelt's government in 1933, to march on Washington with 500,000 soldiers and overthrow it. And you don't get that in your school books today, your education. But the coup was stopped by Smedley Butler. And this is all very well known. This is all true. They sponsored Hitler, these corporations in Wall Street, because they're in tow with the global bankers, and they wanted to create a global fascist empire. They sponsored Hitler, and they tried to overthrow the democratic nation of the US. And they failed. But were they brought to book? No, because they own each other, and they pay off each other all the time. And they continued working through Wall Street and the banking corporations in America and trying to infiltrate American politics, which they did. They overthrew F.D. Roosevelt because he was against them, and they replaced him. Not just him, but they started the CIA, and they replaced all the people in the American government were replaced by globalists, not America First people, not isolationists in the terms of building a sovereign nation, but by globalists. And those globalists' job was to carry on the world after the Second World War according to the interest of the British Empire, the Commonwealth, its interest in the Middle East, in Africa, and all over the world, to partner with the status quo of how things have been in the last few hundred years, to keep all that status quo going, partner with it. Cecil Rhodes started the Round Table. Cecil Rhodes in the 1800s, late 1800s, that was the one that monopolized African diamonds and other African resources. He started a group called the Round Table, and their plan is very powerful. They started many other groups, the Bilderberg Group, the World Economic Forum, Council for International Relations, the Chatham House. Most of the globalist groups today came out of Cecil Rhodes. They are the ones that train leaders for all of our nations today. As I said, like the World Economic Forum, they're all controlled. The Club of Rome, there are 100 other groups. They're all controlled by the same people. And Cecil Rhodes' plan was to continue the British Empire through an alliance of Britain with America. That was his plan. It's all spelled out. You can find it on the internet. These are actual proven documents. And that's the plan. That's been the plan of people. Henry Kissinger, the Secretary of State of America, he said he speaks more to the British government than he does to the American government. Well, used to. He's dead now. He reported more to the British government than to the American government because they were his masters. And it's not really the British government; it's the MI6. It's the It's because the British government are puppets as well. You know, they're serving the banks. The bank, London, the city of London, which is the 1 mile in the centre, it's a sovereign state. It's called not London, the big city, but there's another one, little one. It's just 1 square mile in the centre of London. It's called the City of London. It's sovereign. It's not under the control of British law. They have their own mayor, and it's run by the banks. And they have a representative sitting in Parliament, unelected, who comments on all that the Parliament does to whether the banks approve or disapprove. And they call that a democracy. You see, British policy doesn't come from the people. It comes from the banks. And just like here in Nigeria, policy in Nigeria does not come from the people or from the government. It comes from the National Monetary Fund. And so that's the reality of the world that we're living in today.
I couldn't agree more with you.
Sorry, go on, sir.
Yeah, I was saying I couldn't agree more with you, especially on the need to identify who the real enemy is, because if we are not careful, we begin to hate on nations. You think that the United States is bad, Britain is bad.
Yes.
In the past, for quite a long time, I saw through that lens. That was my perspective. I kind of demonized an entire nation because of those things happening. It was with more learning, education, research, and then interactions with people like you that I began to see the light. That you see, instead of demonizing Britain, there's just a handful of individuals, like you said, these global banks, these globalists, people who actually control, who have kind of subjugated these nations, are using leaders within these nations to serve their interests. So it's not the nations per se. It's not Britain. No. It's not America. It's those individuals. No. And then my eyes opened. And I think we need a lot of that kind of education today so that we do not begin to demonize entire nations. Because some of the nations we demonize are victims themselves. They are suffering the same things we are suffering.
That's right. We're all in it together.
Yeah. So there are just a few individuals who are responsible for all of this chaos and all these things happening around the world.
Yes.
And they are profiting from it.
Yes, sir.
And I want to ask, sir, you see, we're just getting into like halfway to my discussions with you on this subject. So as it stands, I would have to now, break this conversation into 2 episodes so we can now finish up on our next stream. But then before I do that, I'm still going to take you up on one more question. We we live in an information age, or so it's called, an information age, where every form of information is bandied about, whimsically. And I want to ask, what's your take on the media's role in this obsession with war, especially in a modern world rife with fake news and propaganda?
Well, the media are sponsored by the banks, so they're owned by the banks. So when we talk about the banks, we're also talking about the oligarchy, the major corporations, the main financial interest, and so these are the big wealthy corporations, the billionaires around the world that control, like it says, that 0.1% of the population control more than half of the world's wealth.
Wow.
And so you've got big players like BlackRock, I think it's called, is one of the probably the biggest corporation in the world. And I can't remember the name of the other one that's similar to BlackRock. But so these control media through advertisement revenue mainly, or some of them make direct donations to the media, like Bill Gates making huge donations to the BBC. I mean, that just... When I was a boy, that was illegal. We had something called separation of powers.
You
And,
couldn't call media independent anyway anymore.
Yeah, conflict of interest.
Yeah.
And he calls it philanthropy. Philanthropy, my foot. I hope you know what my foot means. It means rubbish. Or we say pull the other one in Australia, pull the other leg. It's just absolute rubbish and lying. So, he calls it a philanthropist. He calls himself a philanthropist. He's not. He's a dictator. And he's, and I'm not saying, I don't know, he's probably one of the puppets. I don't subscribe to him all this intelligence. I think he was probably appointed to that position. And I think a lot of these people were in some of the world's, what do you call it? Media, social media corporations. I think they were appointed by leading powers of the world and they get money for it. They get a good reward, but I don't think they're the brains behind it. I'm not sure they're that intelligent. But so Bill Gates, this wonderful philanthropist coming in with a cape like Superman to save the world. Gives these big loans to media corporations. If you have a look at the list, just find it out. It's official. The list of media corporations and that he has sponsored. Also, other pharmaceutical corporations that report on the efficacy of different pharmaceutical interventions that he sells. His corporations make money. And he sponsors pharmaceutical corporations to do scientific tests on products that he makes money from. So how can
how can the results be unbiased and objective?
Yeah, I pay you to go and write a report on me. Make sure it's a good report.
I'm going to have just wonderful things to say about you.
Yeah, that's right. I'll help you with that. And I'll help you write it. And so that's what he's, imagine that the person has so much private business interest sponsoring a media organization that reports on it. You asked the BBC to do a report on Bill Gates.
It's going to be image laundering, just make him look very good.
Yeah. And this is so clear. I remember, sometimes when living in the UK and I served on, this committee, that they were so strict on conflict of interest. That if you met anybody once, just even for 5 minutes, you were cancelled. You know that person, so that's a conflict of interest. So you have to resign from the board. They were so strict, and yet they're governments. And their major oligarchs, the financial powers of their country, are are drowning in conflict of interest. No one says anything. So this not only does Gates give direct major sponsorship to media corporations, but these oligarchs and major corporate interests sponsor media organizations through advertising. I don't remember which ones in particular, probably all of them, the main establishment media in America that we all know. They're sponsored by the pharmaceutical companies. The pharmaceutical companies advertise on these networks constantly. If you watch these networks in America, that we don't get the advertisements here in satellite television, but in America, domestic TV, most of the advertisements on these news networks will be pharmaceutical corporations.
Yeah, very true.
But they do not sell pharmaceuticals through advertising. That's not really the way they market. They market through the medical establishment. So you go to the doctor, and the doctor will be flogging the main pharmaceutical interventions. It's the doctor that is their marketer, and he will be the one, or she will be the one, advertising their products on the wall of their surgeries and advising all their patients to get this or that and so on and so forth. They do not make money through advertising on news networks. That if you look at the industry and how their income comes in, it's not generated by news network advertising. So why do they do that? Why is it that they advertise on news networks when they don't need to? Well, it's to monopolize the income of the news networks. Most of the income of news networks comes through pharmaceutical corporations. Why is that the case? To make them obedient. So if they say anything about pharmaceutical companies that isn't conducive to their interest, the interest of the pharmaceutical companies, they will pull their advertising, and that news network will shut down. They'll have nothing. It's just control. And so the director of health in America at the moment, Robert Kennedy Jr., is putting through legislation that will stop that. That will stop a conflict of interest in advertising on news networks. So we will actually get maybe we'll get proper news. Like a news expert said many years ago, the work of the media is to make sure real news doesn't get out. That's their main job, and put out news that's in the interest of of other people's financial interests, and that's the truth. So that's the world we live in. It's the actual world we live in, where we are lied to by the media because of financial interest. That's the real world. Welcome to the real world. Now that shouldn't be the case. When I was young, it wasn't. And when I was young, this was illegal. Doctors and lawyers were not allowed to advertise. Pharmaceuticals were not allowed to advertise. Why? Because the doctors had to give impartial advice.
Yeah.
Not controlled by financial interest of any industrial complex. That's totally gone now. They're all controlled by an industrial complex. And the pharmaceutical, the medical industrial complex, they're the ones that register the doctors. So if the doctor doesn't promote their goods, their services, their products, they'll have their license taken away. Imagine that. The powers that produce the industry and make the profits are the ones that control the licensing of the doctors.
Wow.
What can possibly go wrong with that?
Talk about paying the piper to dictate the tune.
Yeah, and they might say, "Oh no, we don't do that," and they have a trail of where they hide what they're doing through different organizations, the way they have it set up. But that is surely how it's done, if you follow the money through the trail. And this is where are the people? Why don't we object to this? Why aren't we involved? Why don't we raise our voice? Well, we're just too busy on the beach, relaxing, reading a book. We don't care. No, there's nothing like this happening. It's all good, no problem. We don't, it's all conspiracy theories, and we just get about our own business, with our family. And it'll all go away one day. I'm sorry, it's not going to go away until something happens. So yeah, this is how the system works. And as I said, every nation is a victim to this, and we have got to stop letting the banks divide us and blame each other.
Yeah.
And come together and fix this corruption. The corruption's in the banks, it's in the warfare, it's all these industries that control our government. In America, you got lobbyist groups, pharmaceutical industries. Israel is one where they Israel, the Mossad works in line with the MI6 and the CIA. And we've got a huge conflict of interest. They said that the Russia had there was a conflict of interest between Russia and Trump, but in Congress, they're all waving Israeli flags. Just look at the photo. Where's the conflict of interest? Who's controlling the Congress of America? Now, is that making a political statement about Israel as a people? Of course it's not. About the Jews as a people? Of course it's not. I'm just saying look at what's happening. Follow the money. What do they do? Well, America gives a grant of X billion dollars to Israel. It comes back to the politicians in Washington through lobbyist funding. So you get pharmaceutical companies and all these other food companies that are poisoning us in their food industry.
Arms dealers.
Yeah. Yeah. Arms dealers is very big. They come to the Congress and they take these politicians out for dinner. And they said, well, wouldn't it be nice if you had X million for your next campaign, for the election campaign? And they sponsor these people they sponsor their election campaigns. Now, this is mafia. It's mafia. And once these people are elected, the first thing they have to do on day one in office is pay these people back.
Yeah, yeah.
Otherwise, they will be ousted. They will be put out of office. They might even be assassinated, because this doesn't just stop with lobbying. There are many, suiciding has become an industry today. Suiciding. You suicide someone. It's an industry. Like one of the recent ones committed suicide by shooting himself twice in the head.
He didn't do it properly the first time, so he came back from the dead and shot himself the second time.
And the police come and say, well, that was suicide. They have a look at the evidence, they say that was suicide, and then they get taken out for lunch. And that's how the whole system works. It all works like judges. It all works like that. Not every judge, not every policeman, but there's enough, and which policeman and which judge to use. So this thing of lobbying funds, it should be stopped. Politicians should not be allowed to take money from private interests like that. It's the people that should vote for the government, not the corporations. The people, not the banks. The people, not the industrial complexes. The people. And so I don't know how they can finance politicians' campaigns. Maybe the government should give an equal amount of campaign finance to each campaign, and the people are not allowed to raise their own money, or I don't know. They've got to do something. Maybe they can get campaign funds just from people, but then they'll still corrupt it somehow. The corporations will put money in through the people and hide their part in it, and make it very difficult to follow the money. This is how philanthropists work, like George Soros and so on. They and many others, USAID, they sponsor a whole lot of revolutionary movements things that they say woke is as I said before, a grassroots spontaneous movement. It's not. It's a political revolutionary movement sponsored by financial interest, but they do it in such a way that they hide the money. They put the money through one institute, then it goes to another institute, then it goes to another one. It's laundered, then it comes out on the streets, hiring people to go on the street and say, "I hate Trump." They're hired. They're bought and paid for by industrial complex. All these people go out and hold up placards. Say, what does your placard say? Oh, I don't know. I haven't read it. I was just told if I held it up, I'd get $5,000. There's a lot of that happening, and some of them are thugs, not just people holding placard. They will hire others to go and set things on fire.
Yeah, vandalize and destroy
to create violence. And you can trace the money, and these people are going to be brought to account that have done this. It's not so much the small criminals; it's the ones that have sent them.
Yeah,
it's the big ones. It's even in pedophilia. We've got to go to the top. The ones that are organizing this human trafficking and child trafficking around the world, the so-called globalist democratic institutes. One of the reasons you asked about war, one of the reasons they create war is because it's very easy to take children off the streets in the state of war.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that's happened to Ukraine. Their children are vulnerable to international trafficking and pedophilia, and it's everywhere. Happens in Africa, but it's globalists that are doing it.
Yeah.
Many times. This is very big, and the more you dig, the more you find, and the worse it gets. And this is not going away. It's got to be dealt with. Satan doesn't just say, "Well, okay, well, I've had enough now, and I'll retire." It doesn't go away. It has to be. God has to deal with it.
Amen. Thank you very much, sir.
And He will, by the grace of God.
Amen. 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 Thank you, sir. The Bible says you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. And it's important that we know these truths. We become educated, we become aware, we become awakened to these truths, so that we don't hate the people we ought not to hate, and so that also we don't continue with this slavery and subjugation mentality. We begin to hold accountable those we need to hold accountable. We begin to demand of our leaders that they make, laws and policies that prioritize peace and well-being, not just profit. I want to thank every one of you who's been a part of our live stream today. Thank you for joining this live stream. Like I said earlier, this is not the end of our discussion on this subject. We've just gone halfway. On our next podcast, live stream, I'll be talking with Prof about pathways to peace. We'll bring these discussions to an end. There's still so much. The profiting out of war, we'll still talk about those issues, and then now look at the pathways to peace, especially in the light of the life and teachings of Jesus Christ. Thank you once again for joining us today. To have yourself a great day. And Prof, thank you very, very much once again for being so resourceful and a blessing. God bless you, sir.
Well done. Thank you. Bye-bye, sir.